In today's video, we are going to be picking every single Week 9 college football game using this beautiful website, Playoff Predictors, as we do every single week. We're getting this one out on a Thursday as usual, which means we missed some Tuesday and Wednesday CUSA action, which some pretty notable results in there, but I'm super stoked to be picking all of the other games this week. It's going to be really fun. We've got the Hawaii nightcap, as should happen every week, and just some really fun games in this slate. So I'm pumped to get out here and make some picks. But firstly, we look at those results from the Tuesday and Wednesday matchups. Liberty going down to Kennesaw State was the big one. I picked FIU to beat Liberty a couple weeks ago. They came up just short in OT, and finally, Liberty catching up to themselves with all those close games against bad opponents. Shout out to Sam Houston. They're bowl eligible, though. Shout out to Jacksonville State getting another win. I think that's a team that could absolutely win the conference in the CUSA. They've been playing really well this season, and poor UTEP just can't find a way to do it. But let's get in, without further ado, to the actual picks here. Georgia Southern at Old Dominion. This one is on Thursday. This one's going to happen shortly after this video goes up. I really like the way Old Dominion has been playing. They've been really, really impressive. They're coming off a win over Texas State. But Georgia Southern, the emphatic win they got last week as well. I believe it was over James Madison, if I'm not mistaken. But I think Old Dominion can get the win here at home and continue to roll after what was a really rough start to the season. They were over significantly into the season, and they've gotten some really nice quality wins. Old Dominion continues to impress me, and I think they'll get a nice win here that'll put them in a really good position in the Sun Belt. That's slowly becoming a more and more entertaining race. We get to Syracuse at Pitt. This is a Thursday game. This is a game I actually contemplated and thought about maybe going to, but didn't really come together. Pitt undefeated. I think that this Syracuse team is really, really good. They've got the loss to Stanford and a blip game they kind of had on a Friday night that was very entertaining. But McCord is playing so well in quarterbacking this team. I'm aware that Holstein is doing that for Pitt as well. I've really liked how Cade Bell has transformed their offense, but give me Syracuse to get this victory on the road. I was surprised to see Syracuse was +6 in this game. I really trust the Orange to go get an upset victory and end this magical start of the season for Pitt. But hey, if Pitt gets a win here, 7-0 and well on their way to potentially beyond an ACC title and a playoff appearance if we're really talking. But if you look at who Pitt plays after this, the going gets real tough, man. They need this game. We got Louisville on the road versus Boston College. Louisville, I would argue, is probably the best 3-loss team in the country. I think they're going to beat Boston College on the road. The Eagles kind of getting exposed. Do you remember how high people were on them after they beat Florida State and then looked okay versus Missouri? People were getting egregiously high on this Boston College team, and it's just completely fallen apart. The loss to Virginia, the loss to Virginia Tech. They're now at 4-3, and I think they're going to drop to 4-4 against Louisville. If Louisville finds a way to lose this game too, that's going to be really shocking to me. I think that's a team that's pretty dang good that's lost some close games to good teams. I mean, you look at who they've lost to, all close. Notre Dame, SMU, and now Miami. It's a good Louisville team, and they're playing pretty decently. Defensively, we'll see. They've got some flaws. Boise State at UNLV, another Friday game. Friday night game. I will be at this game, and I am so stoked to be there. I'm actually going to be on the sidelines, credentialed at this game, and it's a huge matchup. Boise State, UNLV. UNLV's been playing really well, and they play well at home. They nearly took out Syracuse there. But at the end of the day, I'm just going to rock with Boise State in this one. And I'm so sorry to UNLV. I want to pick them, but I just really have been so impressed. And Genty is a guy that when you're picking a big game like this, you just know the dude's going to show up. And this UNLV defense isn't exactly locked down either. They've struggled a little bit. I really like their defensive back play. It's been pretty good. But also Maddox Madsen has been so good at protecting the football. Boise State has been super well-rounded. And I kind of doubted the Danielson hire when it happened. I thought it might have been a semi-reactionary hire last season, but it's clear that was not the case. Rutgers at USC is another chaotic Friday game. USC, how did they lose that game to Maryland? Nobody knows. I do think they'll get the bounce back victory here. You can't argue that USC is playing poorly. I mean, they've been playing all right. And Rutgers is a team that you could say has been playing poorly. They just lost to UCLA. Really bad loss for them. For Rutgers, it's just been honestly a pretty sad crumble to their season. They can still recover and make a bowl game, but I don't think they're going to start their recovery versus USC. I really like the Trojans at home here. And we're starting to see in the Big Ten and SEC with how deep they are, how much the cannibalization can occur in these conferences. Washington on the road versus Indiana. Indiana hosting College Game Day. They're not going to have Rourke in the game. And for that reason, it's going to be either Cherry, it's going to be Taven Jackson potentially, and I'm not sure who they're going to rock with at quarterback, but I'm not sure if it matters all that much to me. It's a Washington team that has struggled this season, and I think Indiana will get the victory at home in this one and improve to what I believe would be 8-0 on the season. Yeah, 8-0 for Indiana, which would be just such an unbelievable start. They should win this game, which is the craziest part of everything. Like, they are favored to go 8-0. They'll be favored in virtually every game down the stretch except for Ohio State. So really impressive stuff. Notre Dame at Navy, another super awesome game. So hyped for this one. Navy is a team that I think could do it if their offense can show up and they can expose some of the flaws that Notre Dame has had. But at the end of the day, the Fighting Irish have been rolling recently, and I think they will get a win versus Navy. This is clearly the toughest opponent Navy's played all year. They do have that signature win over Memphis, but I think at a neutral site, this is just going to be too much to handle for Navy. I think Notre Dame gets it done. Nebraska at Ohio State. Rest in peace, the Cornhuskers. My goodness, they just got finished getting walloped by Indiana. They're going to get walloped at Ohio State. The Buckeyes are going to absolutely dismantle these guys. Poor Nebraska. Such a bad spot for them after that loss to Indiana. And we were looking at Nebraska's schedule, wondering, could they be 7-0 headed in that Ohio State game? The answer is no. They were going to be 5-2 and now in danger of going to 5-3. And you look down the stretch for who Nebraska plays, it gets a little sketchy because they were 5-3 last year and missed a bowl game. And there's some pretty tough opponents on the horizon for Nebraska that are playing really well. Like, off the top of my head, I believe USC and Wisconsin and Iowa are all on that schedule. So the Cornhuskers are going to be hard-pressed to find victories down the stretch here. Buffalo on the road versus Ohio. The Bobcats are a team in MAC play coming off a loss to Miami of Ohio in that rivalry game. And Buffalo coming off of a not great loss as well last week. I believe they lost to Western Michigan. That now has Western Michigan undefeated in conference play. So Buffalo's been pretty bipolar. Ohio's been a little bit more consistent, so I like them at home here to get the win. Maction is getting pretty chaotic, and it's just in time for them to all start playing on Mondays, and that's going to be pretty awesome. But give me Ohio in that one. Oklahoma on the road versus Ole Miss. The Rebels are a team that I just trust a lot more than Oklahoma. Oklahoma is so dysfunctional right now, so terrible looking offensively. They get absolutely blasted by South Carolina last week. Ole Miss should roll in this game. Ole Miss is still rated as like a top 3 team in some systems right now, and so a lot of people have written them off. I would not be surprised if Ole Miss can go on a little run here on the back half of the season. We'll just have to see what happens, though. Tulane at North Texas. North Texas having a great year. Close loss to Memphis last week. And I think they're going to have another close loss to Tulane. Tulane has just been playing so well since those opening couple of losses, and Summerall squad continues to light up the scoreboard. I think they're going to do it at North Texas again, but we could see a little bit of scoring by both teams in this one. They're both very prolific offensively. We've got North Carolina on the road versus Virginia. The Cavaliers, led by Tony Elliott, have kind of seen what was a fun start crumble a little bit to the point where now they've got a big game versus North Carolina. The Tar Heels, a team that, if you remember, was off to a 3-0 start to the season and have just completely folded since then. They might have actually even been, no, they were 3-0, and then that's when they lost to James Madison. I have no faith in North Carolina. I think Mac Brown's going to resign at the end of the year. I'm rocking with Virginia, and fading North Carolina has been a very good strategy recently. I believe Virginia is a 4-point favorite in this. It's just wild to me how quickly things fell apart for North Carolina this season, and it's a team that I thought could surprise some people and do some things with a scheme that was sort of designed for the departure of Drake May, and they were ready for it, I thought, but clearly there's just something very wrong, and it's not even offensively. It's actually defensively something's very wrong for North Carolina. Charlotte on the road versus Memphis. I'll tell you what, the 49ers certainly fooled me. After that win over East Carolina, I really thought they were turning up, and they get flattened by Navy. It's a really good Navy team, but this is a really good Memphis team. So I think Charlotte's going to get flattened again. Memphis just so excellent, and that one loss to Navy aging really well. I think Memphis is getting back into this American Conference title race. It could come down to that season finale against Tulane that they play in terms of a conference title spot, unless Navy and Army just continue to win out. But Tulane plays Navy later in the year. I think they'll probably have Navy at that point. Georgia Tech at Virginia Tech, attack battle. This is always really fun. The Hokies are a team that totally has a backdoor ACC title shot wide open, but this is the type of game they haven't afforded themselves to be able to lose with how much they struggled in the early season. They have 3 losses. I think Virginia Tech wins this one at home, coming off of the nice win over Boston College, and they turned the ball over a ton in that game and played really sloppily. They cleaned some things up in this one. They shouldn't have any real issues versus a Georgia Tech team that is scrapping and fighting for every game right now. They are a game away from bowl eligibility, I believe, and they're just so close. And yet you look at their schedule, they've got a really, really tough end of their schedule. They still have to play Georgia and several other pretty good teams down the stretch here. So we'll see what happens with the Yellow Jackets, but I think Virginia Tech gets the home victory. Arkansas, Mississippi State. The Razorbacks were a team that was playing super well. I thought they were super underrated, but they lose that game to LSU. Things just seem to be going wrong. And on the road at Mississippi State, do I dare pick the Bulldogs, a team that's looked horrendous at certain points? If you've been watching their games the last couple of weeks, Jeff Lebby's squad is playing the best football they've played all season long. I think they shock the poor Hogs here, and I think they get a win in Starkville that will have Arkansas questioning everything, including Sam Pittman's future at this program. And it's right there for Arkansas. It's right there, this win. If you can get this win, I believe they still have that cupcake game versus like Wofford or something later in the season. Arkansas could totally be a bowl team and beyond that this season, but they have to have this one. I just hate the spot for the Hogs, unfortunately. Georgia State on the road versus App State. App State, a team that has really disappointed at many points this season, but Georgia State has been so inconsistent and so unreliable. I'm just going to rock with the home team because I'm just not sure in this one. But Sean Clark at App State, a year after he won a division and won a bowl game at App State, we're talking about like hot seat talk with him, which is pretty shocking. Temple on the road versus East Carolina. You want to talk about a really disappointing team? It's been East Carolina. They've fooled me left and right. And Temple has been a really fun story. They found a way to get a couple of wins under Stan Drayton. Do I dare pick the upset here? I know I've said do I dare a couple times, but it's because some of these picks I wasn't quite sure about. But now that I'm looking at them, why not? Let's rock with Temple. The Owls really finding something this season, and I think this is just the difference between a team that's having a lot of things go right and a team that's having a lot of things go wrong this season. Central Michigan on the road versus Miami of Ohio. The Redhawks going to continue to roll in conference play. Chuck Martin's got a really good squad. They could mess around and make a conference title run here despite their rough start to the season. And so keep an eye out for the Warhawks. NIU on the road versus Ball State. Ball State and Mike New is on the hot seat. Give me NIU to get a quality road victory. Hammock squad has been very, very consistent. And I know you might say they've been inconsistent because they they beat Notre Dame and lost to teams like Buffalo, but I think they've been really consistent in the way they've played, the style they've played, regardless of who their opponent is. And sometimes that can result in them being susceptible to a loss versus a worse team, but also beating a really good team. So I just think their identity is going to be what guides them to a win over Ball State. Oklahoma State on the road versus Baylor. How does Baylor respond after an emphatic, dominant win against Texas Tech? Have they figured stuff out? And then Oklahoma State, does their season just completely fall apart? Are the wheels completely coming off for the Cowboys? I think Baylor can get a home victory here. And for Oklahoma State, there's just not a ton I can trust. But for Baylor, it really looks like they figured some stuff out last week. And I just trust their offense. Oklahoma State, there's not a ton I trust. Even though they tested BYU on a Friday night, kind of a weird game. Maybe you could argue Oklahoma State's figuring it out. But I just don't trust the Cowboys as much as I trust Baylor for their performance because they left no doubt. Oklahoma State still left some doubt versus BYU. And that's what allowed the Cougs to come back and win that football game. Southern Miss at James Madison. Will Hall fired. Southern Miss, no head coach. Sometimes we see the interims come in and fire up the team, and they'll play well for a game. I don't think that happens in this case. I think James Madison wins this one and gets another victory coming off of their first conference loss of the season. Wake Forest on the road versus Stanford. Wake Forest, I think quietly has racked up some nice victories under Dave Clawson this season, but I actually think Stanford clutches up at home. Stanford is not a bad team by any means, and they've certainly competed in some games. They're coming off a Tough loss to SMU, but Wake Forest having to travel all the way to California for this game. I think Stanford steps up and gets a nice victory here. We've got Texas Tech on the road versus TCU. This one a fun little Texas battle. Texas Tech, man, I really just don't have a ton of faith in them defensively. And for TCU, I think they're a team that got hit with a lot of bad turnover luck and bad luck early in the season. It really feels like they're starting to balance out in the back half, and I think they can beat a Texas Tech team that's reeling a little bit after that loss to Baylor. Give me the Horned Frogs to get a home victory, and for Sonny Dykes' squad to start to get back on the right track after a really nice win over the Utah Utes. Eastern Michigan on the road versus Akron. The Zips, a team that just seems lifeless. And Chris Creighton's Eastern Michigan squad, once again, getting another close win last week. They have continually impressed, and I'm really happy with how Eastern Michigan has looked this season. Missouri on the road versus Alabama. Top 25 battle. Two teams that have been struggling really bad over the last several weeks, and yet, for the most part, have avoided losses. Bama loses to Tennessee in that collapse in the second half. And I just think they've got to beat Missouri, right? I mean, what happens if they don't? If they don't, we're talking about some really uncomfortable conversations being had, especially with how not good Missouri has looked. Missouri's looked worse than Alabama, and yet miraculously they only have the one loss because they had so much terrible play concentrated into just one game against Texas A&M. So Bama should beat Missouri and kind of smash the mirage that is their 6-1 record with Missouri that it's currently showing. Bama should win and should get a bounce back, but then again, this team almost lost to South Carolina, so anything could happen with the Crimson Tide in this football game. But I think if they play their B game, they can beat Missouri. BYU on the road versus Central Florida. BYU flirted with disaster last week. They were at home. They were against Oklahoma State, and now they go on the road. Central Florida hasn't even been playing very well, but I'll tell you what, I just think they're going to find a way to get out and run and find a way to beat BYU and end their undefeated season. So that's two guys, BYU and Pitt. I'm predicting their undefeated seasons end this week. It just feels like it's about the time in the season where if it's a team that statistically and by their profile wasn't supposed to be undefeated at this point, just the stats start catching up to them in a week like this, and I think that happens with BYU finally. I'm picking UCF, and we'll see if the Cougs get past this game. They've got a pretty wide open stretch ahead of them. Rice on the road versus UConn. UConn coming off that close loss to Wake Forest. They're just playing a different level of football. Rice, meanwhile, I think Bloomgren's going to be fired anytime soon. They haven't been playing very good. Maryland on the road versus Minnesota. The Golden Gophers and Terrapins coming off of nice wins. I mean, Maryland gets that win over USC. That's huge. And Minnesota has a signature win over USC on the season as well. So it's a pretty interesting little Big Ten battle here. I think Minnesota as the home team is one I trust. So for Minnesota and PJ Fleck, they're starting to turn their season around. This would get them to 5-3. Early in the season, it really looked like things could be getting ugly for them, but they've started to figure things out. Billy Edwards Jr. starting to click a little bit for Maryland as well. UMass at home versus Wagner. Look for them to get their second win of the season. We've got Illinois at Oregon. It's a top 25 battle, but not one I will probably be watching a ton of because I anticipate the Ducks will probably win this game. There is a scenario where Illinois gets up and gets off the mat and plays well, and offensively they can make some plays. I try not to profile Illinois as much as like an Illinois team that's not a typical Illinois team. I think their offense is a lot more prolific, and their defense has stepped up this year as well, but the Oregon Ducks just too focused at home. Don't see a ton of scenarios where Illinois pulls this one out. Bowling Green on the road versus Toledo. Toledo, a team that just continues to shine. They got another nice win against NIU last week. I think they get the home victory versus Bowling Green. It's a Bowling Green team that has been kind of inconsistent at times this season, so I think they lose to Toledo. Northwestern on the road versus Iowa. Iowa is playing really good offensive football, and despite the fact that they've lost a few more games this season, which I find ironic and funny because I do think this might literally be a better Iowa team, they'll get a win here versus a Northwestern team that has started to turn some things and some trends around this season, but I like the Hawkeyes at home. UTSA on the road versus Tulsa. Both teams are pretty bad this season. Tulsa has found a way to win some games. I hope UTSA can turn it around here. I'm really rooting for Jeff Traylor to make something happen, but there's just been some really ugly performances from UTSA. I think they'll get the win here, but I'm not super confident, to be honest. Kent State on the road versus Western Michigan. Western Michigan is currently the first place team in the MAC, which is crazy. Not a lot of people saw this coming, and if you did, I mean, kudos to you. Lance Taylor's squad, the Broncos, 3-0 in conference play right now. I think they get to 4-0 with the win over Kent State. Kent State's obviously not very good, so it looks like 4-0 is likely for Western Michigan. And you look down the stretch, they'll be tested. They'll have to play some of the top contenders in the MAC. They haven't necessarily had to do that yet, but if they can keep winning, that's a really fun story that kind of came out of nowhere. Oregon State has to go on the road versus Cal, and for the Beavs, man, their depth is getting tested this year, and it is just instantly folding. They do not have the same depth they had last season, and that's honestly the biggest change from last year's team to this year's team. Once they get past that front line of starters, they just don't have it, especially defensively. That's where they've been shredded the most. Cal hasn't been able to close out any games this season, especially in ACC play. Good thing this is in the non-conference. That's where Cal plays well, and I think they'll be able to close this one out and win pretty comfortably versus the Beavs. The Beavs just, like I said, they've been pretty disappointing this season. Texas on the road versus Vanderbilt. The Commodores have got a lot of magic this season. They've got the win over Kentucky. They've got the win over Alabama. They've continued to impress, but even though they're at home, Texas, I don't see them sleepwalking into this game. After getting bullied by Georgia the way they did at the line of scrimmage, they're going to show up mean and ready to exact their revenge on whoever is in their way. And it's going to be Vanderbilt in this case, unfortunately. I think the Doors take a pretty hefty loss at home, and I don't really think they have many chances at winning this game versus Texas. I know that sounds crazy to say because of what they did to Alabama earlier this season, but it's clear that is not your typical Alabama team. This Texas team, one of the best teams in the country, so they'll show up ready. New Mexico on the road versus Colorado State. New Mexico quietly, Bronco Mendenhall's team has been playing really, really well down the stretch, but so have the Rams. They've gotten a lot of momentum in their sails, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. If any team can be the one to challenge UNLV and Boise State in this conference, it's the Rams. ULM on the road versus South Alabama. ULM has been playing fantastically this season, but Gio Lopez, South Alabama, might be a little bit too much for them to handle. They haven't quite had to play somebody that is cooking. Well, I guess they did actually beat ULM, or beat James Madison. So maybe this is me doubting ULM a little bit too much, but it almost just feels like it's too good of a story. Like, it's got to run out eventually. But Brian Vincent has done incredible stuff for ULM this year, but I like South Alabama at home. Troy on the road versus Arkansas State. Give me Butch Jones' squad to continue to rack up wins this season and get a victory over a Troy team that continues to rack up losses. It's been just a tough sledding season for Troy and not what they were accustomed to under John Summerall. West Virginia on the road versus Arizona. Arizona is playing really, really bad right now, and the Wildcats just clearly do not have the same caliber of team they had last season. On either side of the football, it's been very disappointing to kind of watch their season unravel here. And I don't know if I necessarily trust the rebuild at Arizona fully, but I do think that it will get better for them before it gets worse. But I first think they're going to have to lose to a West Virginia team that is playing pretty decent down the stretch here. Look for Garrett Green to cook against an Arizona defense that has taken the field on an optional basis over the last couple of weeks. Utah at Houston. How bad will it get for Utah? That is the question here. For the Utes, it has gotten really, really bad. Things are just falling apart. Offensively, they can't do anything. I still think this team has a championship-level defense. It just has not mattered with how bad the offense has been. They had Andy Ludwig step down as the offensive coordinator. So what happens this week with the new OC? Maybe they get some life and they can be a Houston team that has impressed in some games this season. So that's what I'll rock with. Florida State on the road versus Miami. The Noles, so horrible. Have we ever seen anything like this? Like what the Seminoles have done this year? Unbelievable how tragically bad they are this season. Utah State at Wyoming. This is a below mid-off between a couple of programs and teams in tough spots for Wyoming. I mean, you're just looking at hopefully getting a win versus a team that has been a corpse of a team with no coach wandering this season. And so look for Jay Sovil to hopefully get the win here. I've forgiven him for his attacking of me on Twitter. I did ratio him, unfortunately. That was to his dismay. LSU on the road versus Texas A&M. This is a massive battle. I am so pumped for this matchup here, and I'm just so ready. I think the winner of this game puts themselves in a position to make the playoff, and dare I say the winner does make the playoff out of this game. And I've gone kind of back and forth on it, but LSU's defense is just playing on another level right now. And offensively, I think it's going to continue to come along. I'm aware A&M has looked pretty dang good since that loss to Notre Dame. But I think LSU is going to march into College Station and at Kyle Field and win this game. And that's my pick there. Michigan State at Michigan. I think the Wolverines will get a home victory here. I'm aware Michigan State's playing well. They just got that win versus Iowa. Could they keep it going? I still like Michigan at home to get the victory in this one. And I don't know, maybe that's just blind faith in the brand of Michigan, but the Spartans have been really inconsistent too, and at the line of scrimmage, they're not going to be able to handle Michigan. Penn State at Wisconsin. I am this close to picking Wisconsin in this game. They are a team that is rated so highly. They've played so well. They've looked good, but I've picked against Penn State in games like this before, and I've come to regret it. And I picked West Virginia to beat Penn State to open the season, and I'm just not going to doubt Penn State again until they play a team like Ohio State or a team like Oregon of that caliber that we know historically they can't win against or have struggled to win against. Against Wisconsin, this is the exact type of game that is James Franklin's bread and butter, that he makes sure they win, and they do win. So I'm rocking with Penn State. Auburn on the road versus Kentucky. This is another below mid-off, this time in the SEC. A couple of teams and programs that have been so bitterly disappointing this season. I don't even know what to think anymore. I'm just going to pick the home team because I tried to pick Auburn for a cheeky upset pick versus Missouri, and it just completely fell apart. I had Oklahoma on an upset alert versus Auburn, but they completely fell apart. The law of averages would tell you that eventually Auburn won't fall apart and they'll win a game, but they just can't do it. And Kentucky also can't do it. So I'm just picking the home team and just letting it be what it is. San Jose State at Fresno State. The Spartans at the Bulldogs. Fresno State with a gutsy victory over Nevada last week, and I think they can continue to stack wins and get a win versus a San Jose State team that was a fun early story, but they did play a lot of really weak teams, and I think reality's starting to come for Ken Niumatalolo's squad. SMU on the road versus Duke. This team, led by Kevin Jennings, has been so prolific over the weeks, and Duke, 6-1. They found a way to win a bunch of games. Kudos to them, huge kudos, but I think it's going to finally catch up with them here. I think SMU is going to smack Duke in this game, unfortunately for Duke fans. Kansas at Kansas State. This one, a rivalry matchup. Is this one the Sunflower Showdown? I think it might be. Kansas State at home. Everything's gone wrong for Kansas. Could they maybe pull off the upset here? That's a rivalry game. They bring it close. Maybe. But Kansas State has been playing so supremely well, and Avery Johnson is coming along so well. I just love Kansas State in this game, so I'm rocking with the Wildcats. Cincinnati on the road versus Colorado. In Boulder, I like the Buffaloes, man. Their defense is playing opportunistic. The offense has been so consistent. For Cincinnati, they don't necessarily have that same consistency that Colorado's had this season, so I like the Buffaloes to get another win. I mean, they nearly took out Kansas State last time we saw them at home. So Colorado just continues to impress me, man. Washington State on the road versus San Diego State. The Cougs, as long as they don't Coug it, will be a college football playoff team this season. Every game down the stretch is winnable for them. I'm going to take them on the road to get the win at San Diego State, but crazier things have happened, and they've certainly played some bad teams a little closer than they should this year. And then finally, we've got Nevada at Hawaii. I've got a buddy that's a Hawaii fan, and it just feels like he is not allowed to feel joy at any point. And Nevada's actually been playing really well. Hawaii, you could argue, is a better team than they were last season, but they just can't win. They can't find a way to win any of these close games, and they just find a way to lose every time, it feels like. It's been so sad to watch, and we'll see if Chang is on the hot seat down the stretch here. Feels like we had a similar conversation about Hawaii before when they couldn't close out any of these games, and then they won like 3 games at the end of last season. We'll see what happens with Hawaii. They don't have a win over an FBS team this season, and that's just a sad state of affairs for the Rainbow Warriors. They have 2 wins, both over FCS teams. But that is it. I picked every single game for Week 9. It looks like I was pretty home heavy, at least in the middle there at picking teams. But let me know down in the comments, which of these picks do you agree with? Which do you think are misses? And as usual, if you enjoyed the content, go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. I enjoy making this video every week. You guys can see the beard's getting a little longer. Don't be alarmed. It's for my Halloween costume, which maybe I'll reveal on social media, so just keep an eye out for that. That'll be a fun time this weekend, and it's because I'm celebrating Halloween this weekend, so you don't get confused. But anyways, if that's all I got for today. Go ahead, like, comment, subscribe, do all the good stuff if I didn't already say that, and I will see you guys next week.